2024, an election year like no other. From the candidates to the issues, from voter integrity and analysis, we'll discuss debates, trends, patterns, election laws, and more. This is Vote 2024, Path to the Polls.
I'm Bruce Hamilton on Path to the Polls. Right now, the way Biden and Trump are going at each other right now, you would think it was November already, but it's not. It's 8 months away. But the battle royale is intensifying, and both are coming out swinging at each other and landing major punches. They're also getting a good idea about how their financial plans differ. And President Biden is lambasting the former president for saying he would cut Social Security and Medicare. Then there's Donald Trump's reported lavish praise for despots and autocratic leaders. It's ringing alarm bells about how he might change the White House if he wins a second term. And if you thought Ron DeSantis was out of the running in the bid for the White House in 2024, some things he is doing may have you wondering, is he really? We've got those juicy topics and more. Thanks for joining us. I'm Bruce Hamilton, joined by my friend, FSCJ political science professor Daniel Cronrath once again. Hey, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Bruce. It's good to be back. I really appreciate this opportunity to have an extended conversation.
Absolutely, and thank you for joining us on Vote 2024, Path to the Polls. So let's start with what's going on right now. Georgia state primary today, Georgia in play. Biden and Trump spent the past few days clashing, and not only do we now see what's at stake, but we're getting a pretty good idea of the vulnerabilities of both. What are the vulnerabilities for Biden and for Trump?
Well, let's first, since you brought up Georgia, and we're just talking about that specifically, let's focus first of all that in this particular election cycle, one of the reasons why we have to look back and say, how did Georgia become a blue state all of a sudden with two U.S. senators who are both Democrats when Georgia is still, very, very much a conservative state outside of the Atlanta metropolitan area and, say, Athens and Savannah. And part of that, if you recall in 2020, was that President Trump was, first of all, telling people that the election and initial election results were illegitimate. And two, he was encouraging people to only vote in person and not vote absentee back during the COVID pandemic. So when you take those factors, I suspect that as we enter the fall, we are going to see Georgia turn back to what I think what it probably still is a Republican state. All right. Also, when you said before about what are the factors, will President Biden be able to get that very, very successful Atlanta metropolitan area coalition, which has come out in past elections, obviously to elect Raphael Warnock and Senator John Ossoff? Will he be able to get that coalition again with events taking place that in his own base right now are not popular, particularly with younger voters? The unrest in Gaza, the continued war there, as we're now with video and pictures coming out of Israeli troops, IDF troops actually dropping bombs simultaneous to us dropping aid packages at the same time. Will that depress the vote for the Democrats in the fall? Really becomes one of the bigger issues. Will that situation in the Middle East settle out? And then also, too, you had mentioned a lot of the social welfare spending and a lot of the social programs. You do not have to be an electoral genius or a political science professor to know that when elections come around in an election fall, the biggest demographic group to come out to vote is senior citizens. And if you want to surely end your political career quickly, tell them that you're interested in cutting Social Security. Regardless of how much they like President Trump, people do think with their wallets. They do think about their own personal situations. And any kind of allusion to cuts to Medicare or Social Security is really a poison pill, Bruce, for any kind of politician, whether you're running as a Republican or a Democrat.
I want to talk specifically about some of those issues in just a minute. Georgia is a swing state. Michigan is a swing state.
Yeah.
A lot of the polls suggest that if the election were to be held today, Trump would win. Elections not being held today. Both of those states are going to be critical for President Biden. He right now is trying to capitalize on the State of the Union. A lot of people are saying that was the speech of the lifetime for him. Outlined his economic message yesterday. Did it resonate with the people? Is it going to be something that may make a difference?
Well, I had a chance to actually rewatch the State of the Union address, and I think one of the things that I noticed upon rewatching is that President Biden began the address very much like a younger version of Joe Biden. You could see he was very, very energetic. And then as the address went on towards the end, he started to get a little bit more off script. And I think it was fair to say that he probably was not as sharp at the end of the evening as he was at the beginning of the evening. Now, in fairness to anybody, that is a long, high-pressure speech. But again, I think he outperformed expectations, Bruce. But I think part of that reason is because the expectations were so low. Okay, we still need to know that President Biden was reading from a teleprompter. We still need to know that, but he within himself, he felt the vigor to go off script. Okay, if you'll remember when Marjorie Taylor Greene and other members of the Freedom Caucus were heckling him from the galleries of Congress, he felt confident enough and lucid enough in his own abilities to still challenge them and take them on and to call them out for things like for the fact that they wanted to campaign for another $2 trillion in tax cuts, while at the same time trying to pretend that they're still the party of deficit hawks and they want to somehow reduce the national debt. So he did a pretty fair moment there. Relative to Michigan, I think one of the things to really watch there in that swing state that Hillary Clinton very narrowly lost, President Biden narrowly regained, is the uncommitted vote, which is rising up out of Michigan, where individuals, particularly from the Muslim American community, we know that Michigan and Minnesota have two of the larger Muslim populations in the country. They again, like a lot of younger Democrats, are very, very displeased with the president's handling of the situation in Israel with the attacks against the Israeli population, and in the Israeli response to that, now 30,000 deaths, destruction. So again, there's a lot of moving factors here, and we'll just have to say it. We'll just have to see as it plays out.
Yeah, go back to some of the things that,
Sure.
that Joe Biden had to say. The heckling from Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah.
He, by all counts, handled that well. But there were some missteps when he called in the one situation the man illegal on immigration. He was called out for that, and he had to backtrack a bit.
Right. He used language that perhaps 10 or 15 years ago is acceptable in the Democratic Party, which today is not. With the strong core of the Democratic Party saying, listen, no human being is illegal. Your life being alive is not illegal. Okay, you may be here in the United States illegally, you may be an undocumented worker, but within his party, within his base, that kind of language is no longer used. I think another misstep when you look at where the American people are at right now, and this has been widely criticized, which I do agree with, was beginning a State of the Union address when we have domestic issues here at home, talking about more aid to the Ukraine. Okay, you can certainly hold the geopolitical view that the United States needs to remain involved and needs to continue, helping Ukraine in its struggle with Russia. The reality of the situation, though, is that with an increasing number of Americans, more aid to Ukraine, while we're looking at many issues here at home, homelessness, inflation, all kinds of struggles that average Americans who are here are struggling with, to open up your State of the Union address talking about the Ukraine was a sour note for many people, not just Republicans, but also individuals within his own party.
But I think he may have tried to make up for that a bit, and I'm not defending him, but
sure.
In addressing the economy, he did talk about helping American manufacturing and helping U.S. families.
Yeah.
So maybe some of his advisors said, you know what, we did this in the State of the Union. When you talk about the economy, you've got to go about it this way.
Yeah, and I think that is one place where President Biden could actually have some success with Republicans and Democrats alike. Okay, and we hold on this. If he begins to talk like an economic populist, okay, you are correct. By every standard measure that we have, the Biden economy right now is strong. When you look at unemployment, when you look at jobs added, okay, there are a lot of traditional factors that we use to measure the health of the economy, and the Biden economy is good. However, we have tens of millions of Americans, primarily through inflation, who are not feeling the results of that economy, and they're feeling left behind. Thus, an economic populist message saying, I am going to fight, we are going to repatriate American jobs, we are going to focus on those key states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. We are going to bring back good-paying blue-collar jobs for individuals. If you're ready to work and you're willing to work in the United States, we are going to bring back jobs that can provide for you the needs of every family in the United States. That kind of thing resonates with people. They want to hear that. They want to know that they don't have to go to college, Bruce, like you and I did, and rack up an amount of debt, which is another issue that the president needs to address. As a college professor, I can tell you, many of my students are preoccupied with student debt. How much is it actually going to cost them to pursue their dream if they want to be an art teacher or a music teacher? Are they going to be leaving their local university $50,000 in debt or greater just to start their careers, okay? A populist message, President Biden focusing on that. These are things that he can do to appeal to that younger generation, despite the fact that his foreign policy right now may be missing the target.
Right. When you talk definitions, yeah, the Biden economy might be, by some definition, a good economy, but there are people who can't afford groceries. And I forget what report I was reading, but they said people still can't afford homes. And by many measures, that would define a better economy. There was a Wallet Hub survey that we talked about on the morning show today that basically said that when you look at Jacksonville and put it against much of the rest of the nation. There's greater debt here in Jacksonville than a lot of other places in the country.
That's exactly the case. And Jacksonville is also a place where we're leading the state in many factors, including evictions, okay? Because people who are unable to pay their rent, they're unable to meet their mortgages. The reality of it is this. And this isn't really a sleight of hand, it's just the way that things are. President Biden is taking credit right now for bringing inflation back to around a 3% level, which typically we look at 2% levels of inflation as being something of the norm, okay? That does not undo the pain of when prices in the 2 consecutive years before that were going up, I think something like 7 and 8% and 10%. Those prices still exist. It's not as if the bottom has fallen out. And if wages aren't keeping up with that inflation, and we talk about this all the time, I mean, we go back to James Carville in the 1990s saying it's the economy, stupid. The reality of it is it's the economy as you and your own family are experiencing it. Nobody cares if Larry Summers or if Larry Kudlow or if individuals who are on Fox Business and CNN are, delighted over the moon that the stock market is healthy, because the stock market's not going to help me provide basic provisions for my family, send my kids to school, make sure that they have nourishing food, and maybe in a lot of lower income Americans' families, have the opportunity to even take a simple vacation.
And that's what did
vacation.
That's what did Daddy George in. I mean, he was popular at the time. Everybody thought, okay, he's going to ride well into a second term. But like James Carville said, it's the economy, stupid,
right.
And that's why Daddy George didn't win again.
That's right. And this is the other thing too about a strong economy. Perception is reality when it comes to the electorate. Okay, you can show them every metric that a traditional economist would use or a political scientist would use. Tell them the economy's healthy. Tell them that the economy's healthy, and guess what? At the end of the day, they feel like they're being gaslit. Okay, because they know how expensive it is to live. They know the challenges. They know the transportation. When you look at the rising prices of things like still paying, above what we typically would want to spend for fuel. Look at the price of a new automobile now. I mean, through the roof.
Unaffordable.
Unaffordable for many families. Even the used car market. You'll remember during COVID how expensive used cars were because nobody could get their hands on a new car. So, and I think Joe Biden is better equipped of the two candidates, even though Donald Trump presents himself as a populist. I think that that's one key area where Biden can lead into is looking at the American people, saying, I felt your pain, reminding the American people that he did come from Scranton, Pennsylvania. You and I have both come from Scranton. Love the city, but we understand that it is a hard scrabble place with a lot of blue-collar jobs and a lot of those jobs being lost. And I think that Biden is better equipped to really lean into that message versus Mr. Trump.
Speaking of Mr. Trump, I know his advisors thought they had him on board. Then he did this interview on CNBC, and boy, I just got to say, I think he stepped in it big time when he starts talking about spending cuts on Social Security and Medicare. And that's going to resonate with a big part of the electorate because, when you talk about cutting entitlement spending, that's going to hurt a lot of people.
Yeah, that's right. Every time President Trump moving forward brings up cutting Medicare and Social Security, he's just written an ad for the Biden campaign. That's effectively what he's done. Because don't think that those words and him saying those words are not going to become fodder for a campaign, which is if you're leaning into economic populism, if you're talking to individuals who are on the tens of millions of Americans who are on the margins of our society, and then you have one candidate from the major parties saying, you know what we're going to do? We're going to continue to cut the very things right now which are helping sustain you, okay? That you're basically gifting a campaign package, okay, to the Biden campaign to run on Trump's own words. I think what you'll probably see, because this is one thing that former President Trump is really, really gifted at, is finding a way to walk back those comments, contextualize those comments, at least in the minds of his followers, which brings another really interesting thing to the fall, too, and this is something which I think that we could talk about, is the turnout model, okay? If Joe Biden is able to keep the younger coalition, if something were to change in the Middle East, for example, or if he were to change tracks, and he was able to get that turnout machine again, it's going to be difficult for President Trump to beat President Biden. It really will. However, if things are out there, if there's still things which are lingering, which depress the Biden turnout, which, by the way, it is not very difficult to depress a turnout, okay? A lot of factors, a lot of people will experience political alienation. They're just not going to want to vote. They're going to feel dissatisfied, despite all the important reasons that people should vote for Bruce, not just for President of the United States, but for the ballot amendments that we have on the fall. The Floridians will be able to vote for specifically in our state, okay? But they're going to count on that, and that's one of the key attributes. When you study campaigning, negative campaigning works to the effect that you can keep a broad chunk of the electorate at home because they're turned off to the process. But in this scenario, in this election, who's not going to stay home? It's Donald Trump. His base is far more activated, far more energetic than the Biden base, and that's something that I'm certain that campaign is relying on, specifically in those key swing states, because as your viewers know and as we both know, winning the overall popular vote is not how you're elected president of the United States. Making sure that you're focusing on Michigan, Minnesota, and you're engaged and you're using the tactics which are going to depress the Biden vote and encourage your vote, that's where the Trump campaign is going to be focused.
Right. And the two key issues that could hurt Joe Biden are immigration and Gaza.
Yeah, that's correct. Interesting when you talked about illegals and you talked about, I thought one of Biden's actual better moments outside of calling illegals was calling out the Republican Party on the fact that Republican senators agreed to a large spending bill.
And the Republicans didn't like that.
No, they did not. But again, this shows the fractionalization within the Republican Party. Okay, you have the Freedom Caucus over in the House. Again, this is not a very, very large group of people, but when you have a very, very divided House of Representatives, as we've seen with the selection of Mike Johnson to be the new Speaker of the House and Kevin McCarthy being shown the door, okay, they wield a lot of political power, and they're willing to use that political power. So when you're showing in individuals like Senator Langston from Oklahoma, who was critical in putting together that package, that bipartisan package to try to send aid relief to Ukraine, to Israel, to secure our southern border, and then to have that not being taken up by the House of Representatives, I thought that was one of President Biden's finer moments, was really calling out the division between the Republican Party in that specific area.
Right.
Yeah.
Netanyahu, he may be on shaky ground. If that's the case, that could work to Joe Biden's favor.
Yeah, well, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to make a bold prediction here, which could age as well as a glass of milk, Bruce, but we'll see what happens with that. I think Netanyahu's political career is over, because I think as soon as the actual military conflict in Gaza comes to an end, the Israeli government is very aware of the fact, this has not been widely reported in American media, that they had foreknowledge of the attack which occurred. They chose not to do anything with it. Israeli citizens are very, very much aware of that when you follow Israeli media versus media here in the United States. And I don't think that Netanyahu is going to be able to weather that storm. Right now, very much as is the tradition in the last 200, 300 years of global history, when there is a military conflict, okay, people are less willing to dispose of their leaders. As soon as this settles, I mean, think about this for a second. Winston Churchill was not reelected prime minister immediately after World War II, okay? So what you're going to end up finding out is that Netanyahu's party, his far right-wing position within that party, I think the writing is on the wall for Benjamin Netanyahu.
I think even if he moves into Rafah during Ramadan, it may be the beginning of the end for him.
Right. Well, and
sooner than later.
Right. And the other thing, and whether you agree with this position or not, this is something very, very important for Americans and people who are hearing the show to understand. The United States and Israel are becoming very, very much separated out from the rest of the world. As this conflict continues, and as the bodies and as the images which are coming out of Gaza of individuals trying to raid food trucks with Israeli IDF forces opening fire into crowds of people who are starving, okay, who literally were, I think the percentages now of individuals who are malnourished in Gaza is through the roof. Young children who can't get the things that they need, images of them coming out dying. This cannot, the United States and Israel cannot continue down this path if they don't expect increasing backlash. To the extent where countries right now, I think what you're going to see here in the very, very near future is our strongest allies, countries of the European Union, France, Germany, all falling out of favor for what's going on there. And the continued reluctance of the United States, of the Biden administration, to publicly state, we want a ceasefire, we are going to hold Benjamin Netanyahu to account. This is where one of the places where critics of the president have said he's looked weak. He's drawn lines in the sand and said Israel cannot do this. Netanyahu has refused to follow them. They just continue to go down this path. And correct, if they move forward with this invasion, it's going to be very, very difficult for the United States and Israel not to look like pariah on the global world stage.
I've got some friends with whom I went to school who now live in Israel. And I've got to tell you, what we hear in the American media and what's said privately may be two very different things, because I know a lot of Israeli citizens are very sympathetic to the Palestinian people and the plight that they have. Also, now we hear about Joe Biden's whisperings in public about Netanyahu and things like that. So I'm not sure that we've got an accurate picture of what the American sentiment is. The American government sentiment may actually be.
And I think it's also important to note, and I know many individuals like this in my personal life, and I'm not Jewish, but I know many American Jews who are not in support of this. But really, their voices are being crowded out and this has been American tradition, again, not to pick on a lot of journalism and a lot of the really good journalists out there, Bruce, but our news media in the United States favors a pro-American government, pro-Israeli government narrative. And again, what I would encourage individuals to not to create cognitive dissonance for anyone out there, but I would encourage people to look at some independent media sources and at least open your eyes to what other things. And by the way, I'm not talking about sources that you may be on dismiss off, like Al Jazeera America or things like that. Just get online, look at some Israeli newspapers, look at some Tel Aviv newspapers, look what's being reported in Israel that folks here in the United States are not seeing because of the narrative which is being laid out. And by the way, I would also argue, maybe you would agree with this, I think that narrative is changing. We are seeing more pro-Palestinian images coming out now in the American news media, being led by the New York Times, which is, of course, is the largest institution in the world. Almost every other media outlet feeds off of the Times. So when you see the Times front page changing, when you see the editorial board of the Times changing, that trickles down to the rest of American news media in terms of what their comfort level is going to be to really start telling the story, the other side of the story that's taking place in Gaza. And by the way, we also forget about the West Bank as well.
I am here to tell you that there is indeed media bias out there. And what I personally do is I will go to 20 or 30 different sources, and I will try to find a common thread. And from there, I will find what the truth is. There is no doubt that there's media bias out there. I'm the first one to admit it. And it is up to us to seek the truth. And as the media is whittled down because there are business interests that are at play, it only gets worse. And the situation is not going to get better until we allow investigative journalism to return to what it had been before.
Right. I mean, I think the last time I checked, I think now you have 5 large corporations who are controlling, 87,
something like that,
88% of our media landscape, with the days of the independent newsroom rapidly declining. Some of your viewers, you may remember, I'm trying to remember the name of the media outlet who a few years ago ran that, gave instructions to all that they owned, all the media outlets that they own across the United States to put out that, but I can't remember the name of the company right now. It's escaping my mind. So even when you move beyond those large 5 corporations, there's still chains out there which are operating and owning local news networks, which still have the ability to promote a message depending upon what ownership wants to have it put out.
It does happen, and again, I'll admit it. We've talked about Joe Biden, some of his problems. Trump's legal woes front and center once again today. He seems to have many of the courts that have made decisions that are in his favor. Does that continue, do you think?
Yeah, I wouldn't. My advice would be, if I were the Democratic Party, I would let the court system unfold as it's unfolding and focus on your own message and your own candidate. I think if Joe Biden can lay out that positive vision for the United States and go back to working class Joe, as we talked to earlier in the podcast, let the courts play out. Okay, let them take it. Let them roll on. And focus on your candidate and focus on real things that you can control in terms of how you want to frame the president of the United States. We have seen the Democratic Party going back to 2015 and 2016 with the Hillary Clinton campaign try to frame Trump in a manner which is criminal. Okay, that there's somehow criminality involved with Trump. Okay, and it's just none of it's ever stuck. We saw the Russiagate investigation. We saw millions of dollars in 2 years spent by Bob Mueller trying to demonstrate that there was collusion and coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia, which outside of a few arrests for lying to FBI officials, there was never anything, substantially linking that. That narrative has never dropped away. Why Trump would continue today to still throw praise at a lot of individuals around the world that we consider to be a dictator, Bruce, I have no idea, other than the fact that there's something about the way, the nature of their power, the way that they hold power that he likes. I can't imagine anyone who would be advising Trump.
Let me get to that. And you know what? A judge found him guilty of insurrection.
Yeah.
A judge found him guilty of sexual crimes against E. Jean Carroll. Mm-hmm. He has been found guilty of a number of things. That said, let me get to him being in favor of certain despots. He hosted Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban at Mar-a-Lago. He said, this is his quote, "There's nobody that's a better or smarter leader. He's the boss. In Europe and around the world, they respect him." He called China's Xi, his words, brilliant. North Korea's Kim Jong-un, quote, an okay guy. And if that's not alarming enough, he said, Adolf Hitler did some good things, What the heck? So retired General John Kelly and others who served under Trump questions whether a man who consistently praises autocratic leaders opposed to U.S. interests is ill-suited to lead the country. This is a man who worked for Trump. He wonders if this man should be in the White House again. Big red flag?
Well, I mean, yes, I would say it's a huge red flag. But let us also remember Donald Trump is somebody who I think very accurately said that he could walk out into the middle of Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, kill somebody, and he wouldn't lose any supporters. Okay?
So you're saying he bloviates?
He's a bloviator. I think a lot of people would just write that off as Trump's sense of humor. A lot of people don't take it seriously. Again, you know, there was back in the 90s, okay, I remember there was a popular film, it was called The American President. And I think it was Andrew Ross Sorkin, okay? And he said that in an election cycle, when people are dispirited, when they feel like America's not working for them, that they would walk across the desert towards a mirage. And when they got to the mirage and found out there was no water, they would begin to drink the sand. And I think that that's what we have right now, because there's a certain level of, and this isn't to put anybody down, by the way, there's a certain level of desperation, Bruce, in a lot of the United States, that if somebody says the right things or makes you feel empowered, that you're willing to tolerate a lot of sand drinking because you're not being presented with a viable alternative from the opponent. Which is why, if I were to advise President Biden, yeah, you've got to take your shots at Trump, I would make this the most positive, populist campaign that he could run. I would appeal to the base of the American people. I would continue to basically say, rather than having his surrogates out there talk about this, how wonderful our top-level economy is, focus on those working class issues, those kitchen table issues that we've talked about, and just try to let that resonate, and just let Trump, you know, at the State of the Union address, I think one of the interesting things that President Biden did, he didn't mention President Trump by name, if you'll notice that. He referred to him as his predecessor, okay? Don't give Trump the oxygen. He craves it, okay? That is what he wants. And one of the other reasons why I think that he makes inflammatory statements like that, Bruce, is because he knows he gets a reaction.
Gets some headlines.
He gets headlines. He knows people are going to talk about him. Donald Trump is also somebody who is very, very much a believer in the concept of there's no such thing as negative attention. There's no such thing as negative press, okay? So he can say things to distract from real issues. May I add, to circle back, you brought up a very, very important one that I think is really important to reiterate. Donald Trump was found guilty of sexually assaulting a woman, had to pay damages, denied it, lost again in court, and has to pay another, was it $80 or $85 million?
$85 million.
By a jury of peers that listened to the totality of this evidence and said that she was sexually assaulted by Donald Trump. And for some reason, I just don't think that story in the media has really gotten the legs that it's deserved, okay?
People dismiss it. They're like, he's Donald Trump.
I mean, to go back into the 1980s, we know how hard this is, and this is very, very important for victims of sexual assault. We know how hard it is for victims to come forward and to be able to prove allegations of sexual assault. But for a jury to believe that he did and award damages to that degree, and for another jury to double down on that and say, yeah, not only was he guilty, but he violated the conditions of the sentencing, that for me is something which should stick. But again, we know that in 2016, when Crude Talk was revealed on the Access Hollywood tape, the voters didn't hold that against him. He was able to still come out in the fall, and he was still able to beat Hillary Clinton. You know, a greater percentage of Republican women voted for Hillary Clinton voted for Donald Trump than Hillary Clinton. Okay, so we'll just have to see. I mean, at some point, you know, the man's like Teflon, Bruce. I mean,
in another day and time, would the fallout be different?
Sure. Oh, I think if you were to go back into the 1980s or the 1990s, I don't think that you would have found this kind of thing tolerated. However, I mean, it's
not another day and time.
Well, Bill Clinton has survived an impeachment. Okay, so for you know, sexual misdeeds. So of course, let's be very, very clear. But in this Clinton situation, you're talking about two consenting adults.
Right.
There may have been an inappropriate power relationship, but nobody was ever accused of actually violating somebody.
But your bigger message here is, I think I said earlier that Donald Trump's all about himself. Joe Biden should make this about him and his accomplishments and what he sees going forward. And to heck with Donald Trump, just ignore him.
Yeah, but I would do so in a way of which, again, would focus on the would focus on the working class base, which he's really going to need to turn out. That, and even though they are a much smaller share of the electorate, Joe Biden cannot afford to have young people stay home. And we should also bring up an important factor:
the black vote.
Yeah, the last time I looked at national polling right now, 3 in 10, 30% African-American men responding to polls said that they would be choosing President Trump over President Biden. If I were the DNC or if I were the Biden campaign, that would send shivers down my spine.
Well, Charles Barkley said it would send, when they were talking about the fact that black men were saying, it's okay that, Donald Trump says, hey, black men proudly wear my mugshot on their T-shirts and things like that. Charles Barkley was aghast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but you also have people like President Biden going on their very, very popular radio program in the morning, The Breakfast Club with Charlemagne the God, telling black voters that if they don't vote for Joe Biden, they're not black. I mean, that equally doesn't quite play well. In any community, that kind of language isn't going to play well.
Right. All right, changing topics entirely. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis officially dropped out of the race for the White House, right? In 2024. Speculation was, okay, he's going to run in 2028. But he's doing some things that make political analysts wonder. Picking fights with Donald Trump. Not just that. Still travels around the country, trumpeting some of the things that he has done while he was on the campaign trail. Proudly tells everybody about his legislative battles against Disney. Sends Florida National Guard troops, members of the Florida Highway Patrol and FWC and the Florida State Guard to the Texas-Mexico border to do, his quote, do what the federal government has refused to do, which is to actually defend this country's borders. Now, why would he be doing that? Recent article I read in Politico. It's kind of confirmed my thinking. Jason Osborne, who's the House Majority Leader in New Hampshire, said, quote, he's like the boy in the emperor's new clothes. Maybe it's just cathartic for DeSantis to be out and about because Trump called him a sad little man. But maybe it's because he says, well, because of all his legal problems, the former president may not be eligible to run for the White House, which means the Republican Party is going to need somebody. And who would that somebody be? That sad little man? Possible?
Well, I mean, anything's possible. I mean, let's just be clear about this. A campaign can be suspended and unsuspended if something happens. I mean, there's nothing to prevent. I believe Governor DeSantis has ballot access in all 50 states. There's nothing, and that's just in the nomination process. I mean, I think what we're really talking about is them getting to the Republican National Convention and there being some kind of coup.
But egotistically, does he think, well, maybe I still have a chance?
Well, he could. I just think this is consistent DeSantis, to be quite frank. I mean, I think that this is what brought him to national attention, these kinds of things, and getting that kind of notoriety in a Republican base, particularly in his home state here of Florida. I think that he's going to want to. This is a brand that Ron DeSantis has discovered that works for him. Okay, why would you abandon the brand just because you might be sitting out of this presidential cycle?
But the Republican leadership here in the state legislature has kind of abandoned him. He's not really paying a lot of attention to Florida politics. It's all national.
Right.
It's too early for 2028. He's keeping himself in the headlines on a federal level. You don't think there's an agenda there?
Well, I mean, I think part of it is just human nature. I think that maybe when you've had that taste of the national spotlight, you just can't let it leave.
Human nature, ego?
Yeah, human nature. I mean, once you've had that opportunity to be on that stage and you take a quick step back, and you still find out there's a willing audience. Listen, there are a lot of people who preferred President Trump, but who still have admiration in those circles for Governor DeSantis. It wasn't necessarily that Ron DeSantis wasn't somebody that was appealing to them. Trump was just a proven commodity, okay? Ron DeSantis may have accomplishments in Florida, but if I'm the Trump campaigner, if I'm a Trump voter, I'm saying, you know what? I elected this guy in 2016 to flip the Supreme Court and put on pro-life justices. Guess what he did? He turned over a third of the Supreme Court, very conservative. Roe v. Wade has been repealed in the Dobbs decision, and he satisfied my every wish that I wanted from a conservative lawmaker. So it's not that I don't like Governor DeSantis per se, but why wouldn't I stick with somebody who's a proven winner? Why wouldn't I continue down that path? Now, I think the other thing it would be very, very interesting. Now, this is probably a complete hypothetical because I'm pretty confident we're going to see Biden versus Trump in November. It would be very, very interesting to see what the Republican Party would look like with a DeSantis Haley head-to-head. Mm-hmm. That would be really, really fascinating. I think that would be very, very interesting. But I bet, Bruce, given the tone of today's Republican Party, I bet you DeSantis would still come out on top of Haley. Because I think a lot of that coalition that Haley has, and that's another real interesting question going into the polls. Will the people who supported Nikki Haley gravitate toward President Biden? Or will they come back to the Republican Party? Because these may not be large percentages, but when you're going around the country, and Nikki Haley on Super Tuesday, even when she lost badly, was still getting 20 to 30% of the Republican primary vote in a lot of these states. Where do they end up landing? Do they end up landing with the moderate, Joe Biden, who favors bipartisanship as a creature of D.C.? We know how much Biden loves bipartisanship. He talks about it all the time. Or, would they go to the DeSantis wing and saying, hey, we want to keep this up. We want to keep, We want to keep our agenda moving forward. Hypotheticals are very, very difficult to say.
Okay. I mean, I just had to pose the question. I know Ron because I know Casey. I know how he thinks. So I just had to kind of wonder out loud. And also about Nikki Haley, I did find it interesting that she threw her support behind Donald Trump. But then again, she's a tried and true Republican. And I'm sure that there was some gentle pressure from the GOP leadership to say, stay with the party.
I think the other thing, too, let's just talk about this for a second. There's also going to be a desire for Governor DeSantis to maintain his big state status as a governor. You know, not everybody's going to be going around the country knowing who the governor of, Montana is per se, or West Virginia is per se. But most people who follow politics understand who Greg Abbott is, Ron DeSantis is, and Gavin Newsom is in California. Okay, they know these names because they're big, they're impactful states, they're powerful states. And I'm sure that Governor DeSantis is interested in, as you said, maintaining his own reputation as being a national leader in that regard. Very, very popular thing to do, by the way, but I will just tell everybody that in the Constitution of the United States, sending state officers to defend a federal border is against the Constitution. But I'm sure that they would argue that the President Biden has abandoned the Constitution because he's derelict in his responsibilities, which again, circling back to earlier conversation, which made Biden's call out of the Republican Party when you had the Senate pass a border bill with $20 billion being dedicated to the border, okay? Perfect? No. Still an improvement? Yes. When you have the Republican Party submarining that while campaigning that President Biden is the one who's culpable for fentanyl and all of the things that we know which are dangerous to the United States right now, that's a hard political juxtaposition to settle. Okay.
Then you've got this whole do-nothing Congress, which is a whole nother show. But Mike Johnson, his job is as tenuous as was his predecessor's.
One last thought for you. I was looking back at the Johnson administration, Bruce, that I don't think either of us remember intimately. I'm not that old yet. But you realize during the Great Society of LBJ, he proposed over 110 pieces of legislation as part of his Great Society initiative and passed 76% of those bills. Okay, 76% of that. Today, if a president of the United States is able to get through one piece of legislation, we clap as if it's some sort of monumental accomplishment. What a change in times. What a change in time. What a change in time to even I didn't even like his politics, but Ronald Reagan, okay, who was able to get things done and find a way to work with the former speaker, Tip O'Neill, and get things done in the 1980s. Those days of being able to come together and pass legislation, they're gone.
Johnson's House Speaker was John McCormick?
Who was?
His House Speaker.
Oh, I don't recall. I know it was a Democrat. It was a Democrat for sure, because remember, I mean, the Republicans didn't get control of the House until Newt Gingrich back in the early 1990s. From the end of World War II all the way through that period, we had like 55 or 56 years of.
But it was still a time when politicians knew when to hold them, knew when to fold them, and there was backroom talk, and people worked together.
Yeah, and
Republicans, Democrats, and those two. The terms Democrat and Republican meant different things back then.
And this is another, to leave you, I know, one of the other things that we've seen why a lot of this bipartisanship has gone away, it went away when earmarks went away. Okay, when members of Congress had a financial incentive to be able to bring back prizes to their own legislative district. Remember how popular Corinne Brown was in her legislative district. I mean, I remember when I first moved to Jacksonville, the huge billboards that said Corinne delivers, okay? Because that was part of it, and that was part of the compromise process. Oh, you've got a dog of a bill that I ideologically disagree with. You're gonna give me $750,000 for a community center? That'll bring me along.
Yeah.
That's gone. So now that you don't have the earmark era, which most Americans wanted to get rid of because they thought it was wasteful spending, et cetera, you've seen a lot of the motivation to take care of people in your district go away. So why would I give you a vote unless you've got some sort of sweetener that I can bring back to my own district?
You give me this, I'll give you that. Everybody walks away happy.
It used to be the nature of the game, and your constituents were also happy too because they saw you delivering something tangible.
Now everybody doesn't have a chit in the game. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, man.
You'll be back.
Sure, love it. Thank you.
And appreciate you joining us for this edition of Path to the Polls. Want to tell your friends about it? All you have to do is tell them it's on demand anytime. And by the way, if you've got something you want us to cover, if you've got a question, all you have to do is email me, bhamilton@wjxt.com. Path to the Polls. Always watch it on demand on the News4Jax YouTube channel, News4Jax Plus, and News4Jax.com. Have a great day.
See why every day more people are choosing News4Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.